shall we do?
I've been thinking about Matryoshka dolls a lot recently. You know, those little Russian dolls that fit inside each other and do a pretty decent job of hiding the fact that, hey, there's more going on here than initially meets the eye. I remember being fascinated by them as a kid, and luckily they're more than just a flimsy metaphor all these years later. The concept of video games within video games might draw up thoughts of quirky minigames and Inception wongs, but there's a whole world of games out there that take it a bit more literally. As in, games within games. What's not to understand and love? It's also completely unnecessary, but that's why it appeals to me. If you don't jerk off for 12 hours every day as a game developer, you can probably make a game that some people would consider enjoyable. And therefore, do you really need anything else? No, you don't, but some devs do it anyway and will happily throw in part of or all of a classic video game as an unlockable secret or even as a mandatory component of the story. Is it pandering to a crowd that will cream their jeans at the faintest glimpse of a game from their youth? Oh, absolutely, but I'm not here to ruin anyone's fun. Just to record it for prosperity. The nature of hiding one game inside another does a lot to imply that the hidden video game is classic and old. It has to be from a technical standpoint, since concealing a larger, more modern game is like trying to hide an elephant in a party balloon. It's impossible in more ways than one. So you set your sights a little lower and more realistic, and you end up finding arcade games inside other larger games that are able to host them. Very often in games that don't immediately mark themselves as being home to other games. Project Gotham Racing and its sequel aren't particularly special when it comes to racing games, even with a title that seems to indicate something about a Batman racing game. Like, Batman gets his mobile, Joker can have a motorbike, fucking Bane in a dinky sidecar with the Riddler?
Of
yes!
course.
But no, sadly Project Gotham Racing isn't quite this exciting. It is, however, hiding a pretty cool video game though. One that, at the time, didn't even exist. I was debating whether or not to include mini-games that eventually became video games sometime after the fact, because that starts to open up windows that lead to the likes of Gwent from The Witcher 3, which is due to become its own video game. It is a different kind of tone, but it achieves the same goal by the end. Sometimes these end results can be pretty special. So, Project Gotham Racing isn't much more than a reasonably serviceable racing game that isn't capable of giving me that Batman car game I crave for. Oh wait, that already exists. Huh, who knew? Luckily for me though, the second Project Gotham Racing game had some creativity slathered all over an unusual area for this kind of title. You can actually walk around the garage in which you keep all your cars, which is a pretty nifty feature that the devs didn't have to include. But I'm glad they did, because you can waddle over to this arcade machine and occupy yourself with goddamn Geometry Wars. I don't know, I guess it's like Asteroids, but dipped in a bucket full of LSD. It's quite a lot of fun to play and a welcome distraction from attempting to wrestle a realistic car around a realistic racetrack. You can go quite far in Geometry Wars, which is perhaps the reason why it became popular enough to warrant a separate release on Xbox Live Arcade, where it briefly held the record for the most downloaded game on the platform. So yeah, it's a very fun and popular minigame that had enough content to it that they were able to pump out numerous sequels that became progressively more ridiculous, and this all came about because developer Bizarre Creations wanted to test out the original Xbox controller in some way. Seems like such a simple task, but they made whatever the fuck this is. That's the kind of problem solving I can get behind. It makes a lot of sense, to me at least, for hidden games to be hiding behind some kind of challenge. It works out as a great reward that doesn't require a ton of extra work from the developers, but also one that can potentially be incredibly satisfying to unlock. With a lot of super hard challenges, the journey itself is very often the only reward that can justify the time and effort required to get over the finishing line. And yet 2004's Ninja Gaiden is over here being a difficult game while also hiding some really sweet shit. How hard is it to transcend to that plane of existence where rewards line up perfectly with the caliber of what you had to go through in order to get there? Not that hard. Though, again, if you're playing a game like Ninja Gaiden, you're probably there in the first place because tricky games give you that inflated sense of self-satisfaction that is otherwise unobtainable by conventional means. Or you have a YouTube channel and need content for rage compilations. Either way, you don't typically need a carrot on the end of a stick to convince you to collect dozens of pointless objects or achieving the highest ranks on the harshest difficulties. But when Team Ninja went around again with the Ninja Gaiden name in 2004, they broke a bit of convention. Hiding away behind some pretty hefty unlock requirements depending on which game you're pursuing at the time is every part of the Ninja Gaiden trilogy from the NES. Meaning that your reward for going above and beyond what is expected from you is 3 whole games from the franchise's past that are very likely to act as an extension of the challenge you experienced in the Xbox game. And that's a helpful coincidence because this injection of nostalgia works really well as a method of enticing dedicated players to carry on with the older games and potentially seek out the other Ninja Gaiden games beyond this. You probably came into this video thinking that the idea of games within games wasn't anything more than a funny little quirk of reusing older games within their sequels, but they can do so much more than that. All it takes is a little ambition. When we've all been disintegrated by the impending nuclear war, or the alien invasion, depends what gets here first, I'd like to think that the Call of Duty franchise is going to be remembered for one of two things. Either the multiple 12-year-olds in online lobbies telling you how much penis your mother puts in her mouth, or potentially one of the best multiplayer maps in the entire franchise. Maybe even like the quality of some of the single-player campaigns in the game. No one's going to remember that. No one's going to remember that. That's really depressing. Hey, I actually managed to bring it all back to impending nuclear disaster in the end. Neat! It's hard to accurately describe why Nuketown in all its iterations is so enjoyable, but you can attribute a lot of it to the aesthetic rather than something important like the layout or how it actually plays. You'll find a lot more traction from exploring the map outside of a game than trying to get shit done on it. Case in point is that you have a hard time shooting the heads off of all the mannequins in an online match with people shooting at you, which is a shame because doing just that in the first Black Ops nets you a fun Easter egg where some Rolling Stones plays for you. And that's wonderful, but for Blops 2, Activision decided to reach into their old toy chest and do something far more interesting. Rock music has been traded out for Atari games, and I for one couldn't be happier. You know, the Rolling Stones are one of the biggest, most important bands in the history of music, but I want to play some motherfucking Pitfall, boy! Other games are available, like River Raid, Hero, and Kaboom, but I don't really mind which Atari games Activision found down the back of the sofa. The gesture on its own is more than enough for me. Having said that, a bit more extensive research has taught me that there's actually quite a lot of people who don't like Nuketown as a map, but I'd like to see something like Hijacked pull off something like this. Alternatively, take Nuketown out of the map rotation and keep it aside just for those sweet Atari games. Sounds like a decent plan to me. It's only just now occurred to me that all of these examples are in fact Easter eggs. Really, what else can you call hidden playable references to older games that have been concealed inside other newer games as a way of tickling that nostalgia bone? Someone's gotta do it, and I am infinitely more grateful if the reference is actually the whole game rather than something subtle and missable. To be fair, you could argue that hiding a game within another game is unexpected and not something that many developers will even think of doing, to the point that very few people can see it coming in advance and may miss out entirely. Uncharted 4 decided against subtlety in favor of parading its hidden game out in the open for literally everyone playing through the main campaign to see. The relationship between Nathan Drake and now wife Eleanor is established and developed through the playing of a couple of levels of Crash Bandicoot, in a scene that I can only describe as weird and yet oddly fitting and appropriate. Are Naughty Dog saying that Crash is acting like a crucial cornerstone of their marriage? No, but I'd like to see them try. You open up a lot of doors when you get a bit more forward with the hidden video games because you can then start weaving them into the narrative, and it's kind of a strange situation where there's a game clearly put in here for nostalgia reasons and for, you know, just giving you that slight nudge to remind you that this is here, but also it can do an awful lot more than that. Crash Bandicoot being Uncharted 4 probably does put smiles on people's faces, but in actuality, it does way more than that. You'll never guess what can function as a helpful tonic to a relationship that can bridge gaps and encourage a sense of sharing interests in a similar vein to recommending TV shows to watch. Well, yeah, video games can be the source of a lot of bad shit, but I've personally got a lot out of sharing video games and my experiences of playing video games with others. Hence this YouTube channel that has been pumping out videos on the regular for the best part of 7 years. I really like how the act of playing Crash Bandicoot in Uncharted 4 is used as a way of illustrating how human and believable Nathan and Eleanor's relationship is. For just a few minutes, you get to play through a couple of Crash Bandicoot stages as you are gently fed character interactions between the two that add up to create a convincing dynamic, and holy shit! That's all from a stupid little reference to an old PS1 platformer. I suppose at a different speed, Crash Bandicoot making an appearance in a game from 2016 was a huge, shockwave-inducing deal that set the internet on fire in time for the announcement of the Insane trilogy just a month later at E3. Find yourself some nostalgia bait that can do both. There haven't been many features in the last couple of decades that have left me as disappointed as the masterpieces in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. It's a brilliant premise. Play any number of classic NES games so you can familiarize yourself with the entry points for these characters, and maybe have enough fun that you consider pursuing the more modern equivalent to see how and where things have changed. But hold up, because some degenerate fuckboy decided your playtime of each of these games should be limited to just a couple of minutes. Was it you, Sakurai? I bet it was, in which case I'm sorry I called you a degenerate fuckboy that one time. But you gotta understand how close we came to just the best way of putting a game within a game. That'd lead anyone to say things that they don't mean. Even so, it's a decision I can understand because they put N64 games on there, and do you know how much space a Wii disc had? Not that much. Also, Super Smash Bros. Brawl was on the same system as Nintendo's first stab at a virtual console, and it's probably not the best idea to simply give away games that can be bought on the Wii shopping channel. Rewind 5-6 years, and Nintendo didn't have to worry about this. We didn't have to worry about a damn thing. Pretty much entirely because of Animal Crossing's ability to be all things to all people. You should try it sometime. I can guarantee that you'll either get swept up by its charm and lose hours at a time to catching fish and paying off a debt, or you'll discover that you aren't capable of having fun and live the rest of your life as an inhuman grey blob of disappointment. Knowing is half the battle. Looking back, I'm surprised how much there is to do in the first game. Obviously, later games added a load more things to do and waste your money on, but the original Western release on the GameCube was jam-packed full of content, including something that showed up for one game and never came back. NES games as furniture that you can play. The whole game. Like, dude, come on. I personally filled the whole basement with NES games because I'd probably do something similar if I had the opportunity in real life. There's a grand total of 15 NES games to collect in Animal Crossing. 19 if you hack the game enough that it lets you play some of the unobtainables like Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda. And if the mood takes you, there is nothing stopping you from loading one of them up and whiling away the time on something like Balloon Fight or Excitebike. I was 9 by the time that an Animal Crossing game had made its way to Europe, and a large chunk of my appreciation for retro games can be traced back to my basement full of NES games, that of course may cost a few thousand bells in-game, but are free of charge in real life. In a game all about capitalism and racking up ridiculous debt, this is remarkably generous. For the love of God, don't get used to it. This is RabbidLuigi, and I cannot overstate what an incredible feat it is for Animal Crossing to feature so many more games within itself, especially considering the current gaming climate where microtransactions and DLC, they're allowed to run rampant and unchecked. For there to be a game out there, even in 2004 this was strange, for there to be a game out there now that features so many other games in there for free, it's genuine madness. And bear in mind, this is also inside a game all about debt, greed, accumulating wealth to improve your social standing and get more housing. That is some tasty irony. Have you got a topic that you'd like me to talk about next week? Make sure you leave a comment about that down below because I'll be taking the most interesting suggestions and making a poll on the next video. In fact, here's one right now that I prepared from last week. I'll be revealing the winner of the poll on Twitter and taking suggestions for games to talk about that are related to that topic. So feel free to follow me over there so we can keep in touch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.